Hi guys, and welcome to another Dice Tower preview. We're Randy and Ellen, and today we're taking a look at the worker placement city building game Trinidad by Joxit. Trinidad plays 2 to 5 people, ages 14 and up, in about 90 to 150 minutes.
In Trinidad, you represent the heads of Spanish families in Buenos Aires. The game takes place over a period of 120 years and focuses on the construction of the city. You'll develop the city by way of houses, productive buildings, markets, churches, and so much more. There are also a number of major buildings, such as a fort and a cathedral, that players can work together to construct. After buildings have been constructed, you can utilize them for their benefit by placing a worker on that location. Points are scored throughout the game for constructing buildings, shipping goods, and how well built your districts are. The winner is the player with the most victory points at the end of the 12th decade.
Setup for Trinidad varies depending on player count. The number of houses, buildings, walls, soldiers, etc. available are determined by the player count. So players start with 2 wood, 2 stone, and 1 silver resource. The last player will gain an additional stone and wood. In a 5-player game, the second to last player will receive an additional wood or stone resource. You'll also draw a character card that gives you victory points for achieving its goal during the end of era scoring. Lay out the action card array and draw an action card to start with. Finally, fill the resource grids according to the player count, and you are ready to play.
Gameplay takes place over 12 rounds or decades. There are just 2 phases per decade, but those phases are packed with content. The action phase provides many different actions to take. Players will alternate actions until they just can't take any more. The 2 main actions you take are the minor building construction action and the minor building activation action. When choosing the minor building construction action, you'll use the required workers and resources for that building type. Constructing your houses and palaces are crucial in the building of your city. You'll need them to enable you to build more buildings throughout the city, and they will also score victory points during the end of era scoring phases. Buildings of all types will affect the victory point value of each district. Houses score victory points based on the district value, but they will max out at only 4 victory points each, whereas palaces have an unlimited amount of victory points they can score. Monuments and fountains can be built on squares for straight-up victory points, but most buildings will also provide victory points when built and can be activated as an action. We'll talk about those buildings next.
The second main action is to activate the buildings that you have been constructing. So constructed buildings are open to everyone to activate, but you can only activate them if you have a house or palace adjacent to the building. Buildings provide various effects when activated. They provide wood or stone resources, refining resources, buying or selling resources, acquiring soldiers, victory points, and even buildings that enhance other buildings. Whenever you acquire resources, you'll take them from the grids on the board. If ever a grid goes empty, you'll actually lose points and will also increase the tension between the natives or pirates, possibly causing a war in the next decade.
Beyond those 2 actions, you can also use your actions to deploy workers to war, load the ship bound to set sail to Spain, hire other affiliates to aid you in construction and combat, gain more influence in the city council, take over as first player, and contribute to the construction of major buildings. These major buildings take quite a few workers, so collaboration is usually a necessity. When a major building is constructed, you also get your workers back, along with the VP value the worker was on. Major buildings also increase district values, which leads to more VP for your houses and palaces. The benefits don't stop there. They also increase the effectiveness of some of the minor buildings and spaces, such as the harbor, that will increase the capacity of the Spanish ship's cargo hold.
Roads and walls are built in the same way as major buildings, but don't provide victory point boosts. Instead, roads will lift the house adjacency build rule and allow you to build next to any building of the district they're built in. Walls, as you may suspect, help keep you safe in war. If all of these possibilities aren't enough, well, then you'll have a handful of free actions to take as well. These actions are pretty straightforward, like playing action cards, trading with other players, setting off for war, or if you couldn't drum up enough support for that major building you wanted to construct, you can retrieve those workers, but you'll have to pay some victory points to do so.
Action cards have a city power and a war power, so they're dual-purpose cards. You can activate the appropriate power when performing a city or war-type action. Once a card is used, it's placed in front of you, but you can get your cards back in your hand with a scouting action. You can also burn these cards in war, but then they will go to the discard pile instead, and you can no longer access those. Some action cards introduce city council workers, which are neutral workers that can be used towards the construction of major buildings.
After all players have passed, the end of the decade phase happens. This is mainly a cleanup phase where workers are recovered and the player order determined. Depending on the decade, a scoring phase and sailing of the Spanish ship will happen. During this phase, if any of the resource grids are empty, this will raise tensions of the natives or pirates. If the tension markers reach the red area, this will trigger a war in the next decade. Depending on the era and player count, a number of soldiers and fighting workers will be placed on the combat board. Miniatures can represent a strength of 1 to 3 and are multiplied by their column. As the decades go on and tensions are higher, the column multiplier gets higher as well. In a decade where war has come, you'll need to stave off the attackers with your own fighting force and use action cards to increase and multiply your combat value. If you're unsuccessful, penalty points will be applied to the houses and the palaces, causing negative victory points.
At the end of the 4 decades called the end of an era, a scoring phase will occur. When playing the full-length game, there will be 3 scoring phases total. This is where you can see how well all of your hard work is coming along. Before scoring points, there is one last matter to attend to, the city council vote. The first player is the legislature and can propose a few different agendas to the council. You can propose to remove war-stricken buildings, speed up the construction of major buildings, construct roads or walls, or rally for peace. Voting is done via blind bid, and the winning side will split victory points among them. Players can cast up to 6 votes, but for every vote, they will decrease on the city council track.
Finally, we reach the scoring phase. Points are awarded for being the richest and most armed. Your character cards now come into play and can be scored if able. The main scoring comes from the city building itself. Every building except production buildings will increase the victory point value of each district. Count up all the positive values and subtract the negative values to determine the VP value. Houses and palaces have a base value of 2 VP, but houses are capped at 4 VP, where palaces, they're unlimited. You can see how having a thriving district with multiple palaces can generate many victory points. Scoring is the same at the end of each era, but at the end of the game, you will also score victory points for your final position on the city council track. The winner is the player with the most victory points, and ties are awarded to the richest player.
All right, all remember this has been a Dice Tower paid preview. All of the components and rules you've seen may not be the final product or design. Keep an eye out for the campaign for any changes that may occur. If you're looking for a robust city-building worker placement game, we think you'll enjoy Trinidad. I like the many aspects that are put into this game. There's a lot going on. There's many different buildings. There's a lot of different options. A lot of those buildings can be upgraded to do other things. You can get production from those buildings. All that stuff is great.
Absolutely. I always enjoy a game that has like character cards and abilities that you can buy from the side, bring into your hand, and kind of work with them. And you can actually get those cards back into your hand if you take a certain action on the board. Right. So once you find something you really love and you have this thing that you want to do like a lot, you can do the action and then at some point pick it up. So I kind of liked that. That was cool. Yeah.
And then how the city builds. Some city builders, there's like a lot of restrictions, and then they'll, if this is adjacent to this, it scores a bunch of points. But in this one, you're building up those victory point values of the districts with a lot of the major buildings. A lot of the minor buildings will add certain victory points, and it increases that on the district itself. Yeah. And then how you score those is with those houses and palaces. So the palaces are unlimited, but you have way more houses. Right. And the palaces are actually they're like between people, right? So like in a 2-player game, there's only 3 palaces. So you're not going to be able to necessarily build all 3 palaces. You're kind of competing for who can get those buildings out first and get, really capitalize on that high victory points.
Another thing that I really liked was the fact that at a point in the game, I wanted to get a building into another district, but I didn't have anybody already over there. So I actually built a road, which allowed me to then build out in a district that I wasn't in. And I really liked that. I thought that was neat.
I do like the collaboration with the major buildings. You have to, try to almost drum up support sometimes because some of these buildings require more spots than you have workers. So you're trying to get somebody else to kind of go in on it, but they know that it can benefit them. But you're like, well, I think this can benefit me also. So I guess we'll build it together.
That was cool. You were trying to get me to build, I think, the barracks or something. It was some big building. I don't remember which one it was. The fort. Yeah, he was trying to go in on it with me, and we had this little negotiation. I said no, because it was going to benefit him a lot more. But then, like a later round, I was like, why didn't I do that? Because that would have helped me so much. So I love the negotiation.
It does keep the interaction between the players up. So that's all good. Anytime you keep the interaction between players going, I do.
Yeah, we like that.
I do like that. Ultimately, if this looks like a game you would enjoy, please check out their Kickstarter and give them your support. I know that they'll appreciate it.
All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next preview.